The sun bore down on the dusty town of Cedar Hollow like a judgment, unrelenting and heavy. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance, its sound sharp and clear, echoing over rooftops and through alleyways. People emerged from their homes and stores, dressed in their Sunday best, moving toward the small chapel that stood like a crown atop the hill. The wedding was about to begin, but Jesse Boone stood far away from it all, his shadow long against the old wooden fence near the general store, boots buried in dust, hat tipped low over his eyes. He didn't belong in crowds, not anymore. Not since they started calling him names like the Giant and Beastman Boone. His size was no secret, 6.5 feet tall, shoulders broad as a barn door. But it wasn't just his frame that made people keep their distance. It was the silence, the way he never explained himself, never fought back when the rumors took root. Folks didn't understand quiet. They feared it. And in a town that thrived on gossip, silence was as dangerous as a loaded rifle. He watched the wedding guests gather, women laughing, men shaking hands. It should have been him once. Years ago, he'd stood at that same chapel with a ring in his pocket and hope beating like wildfire in his chest. But she'd never shown. Just a crumpled note. Asterisk, I can't do it. I can't marry a man who looks like that. Asterisk, he hadn't stepped foot in the church since. Jesse turned away from the celebration and began the slow walk back to his ranch on the outskirts. Dust curled around his boots as he moved past store windows, catching his reflection briefly. Towering, hunched slightly, worn denim, a man built more for burden than belonging. Children stopped their play to watch him pass, some with curiosity, others with open fear. A little boy clutched his mother's skirt. She pulled him behind her. "Don't stare," she muttered, but her eyes didn't leave Jesse until he was gone. The ranch welcomed him with its usual quiet, the wind brushing through dry grass, the creak of a wooden gate, and the low whicker of horses in the distance. Animals didn't whisper behind his back. They didn't flinch when he reached out. They just watched, listened, and understood. That was enough. He moved to the stables, where a lame gelding stood with his leg wrapped in a splint. Jesse knelt beside him, murmuring low words as he adjusted the bandage. The horse nudged him gently, and Jesse allowed a small smile to flicker at the edge of his mouth. "Least you don't care what they think," he whispered. Later that afternoon, while repairing a busted fence along the edge of his land, Jesse spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the town road. A carriage, fast-moving, wheels rattling across the stones, drawn by a frantic white mare that clearly wasn't used to being hitched. The horse was fighting the reins, eyes wild, muscles trembling under her sweat-drenched coat. The driver, a girl, was pulling hard, panicking, trying to keep control. Jesse dropped his tools and moved swiftly toward the road. The horse reared as the carriage struck a ditch, nearly toppling. Screams rang out. The mare broke free of the reins entirely, hooves thundering toward the open field, toward the barbed wire fence. Jesse stepped into the path, unflinching. Dust swirled around him. The mare came closer, foam at her mouth, terror in every movement. Then, suddenly, she stopped, just feet away, chest heaving, nostrils flaring. Jesse stood still, hands low, eyes soft but steady. He didn't say a word. The mare stared at him, then took one uncertain step forward. Then another. Jesse reached up slowly, placing a firm hand on her muzzle. She snorted once and lowered her head. He ran his hand down her neck, calming her with nothing but presence. A minute later, the girl ran up, breathless, skirts torn at the hem. Her hair clung to her face in damp strands, and she carried herself like someone used to standing on her own 2 feet. She stopped short when she saw her horse completely still. "She doesn't let anyone near her," she said, still panting. Jesse nodded once, still stroking the mare. "She's not wild. Just misunderstood," he said. The girl blinked, watching him. Her eyes moved slowly from the horse to the man beside her. She'd heard stories, no doubt. Every visitor to Cedar Hollow did eventually, but none of them looked like this. The man before her wasn't a monster. He was calm, focused, gentle. "I'm Sadie," she offered, her voice still shaky. "Jesse." She took off after a rooster jumped out near the mill. Bolted. I couldn't stop her. Thought she'd kill herself running. She just needed to be heard. Jesse replied, stepping back as the mare began to graze. Sadie took the reins, still wide-eyed. I came for the fair. My cousin's getting married. Jesse nodded, already turning to leave. Safe ride back. She hesitated. You work with horses. They work with me. She laughed under her breath. Not mocking, genuinely surprised. Well, thank you. I think you might have just saved her life. Jesse tipped his hat and walked back to the fence he'd left unfinished. Sadie watched him go, the silent rhythm of his steps somehow more profound than all the town's chatter. Back at the chapel, the bride kissed the groom and the bell rang again. Inside, people clapped and smiled and drank lemonade under ribbons tied to rafters. But Sadie wasn't there. She sat in the carriage, brushing the mare's mane, thinking about the man with the quiet eyes. As she looked back toward the ranch, she whispered, almost without realizing it, "She never lets anyone near her." And she wasn't sure if she meant the horse or herself. The next morning, the sun had barely crested over the hills when Sadie returned to Jesse's ranch. The white mare, Willow, as she called her, walked calmly at her side, ears flicking forward with interest instead of fear. It was the first time Sadie had ever seen the horse behave that way off a lead rope. She didn't understand it, not really, but something had shifted since that moment in the field. Something quiet, something deep, and she needed to see it again. Jesse was out near the southern pasture, mending the fence he'd abandoned the day before. His movements were methodical, unhurried. He didn't look up when Sadie approached, but he wasn't surprised, either. "She walked here without fuss," Sadie said, halting a few paces away. "That's never happened before." Jesse gave a small nod. "She trusts you. Might trust me, too." Sadie ran her hand down Willow's neck. "You do something to her." He looked up then, a faint shadow of a smile on his face. "Didn't do nothing. Just let her speak first." That sentence sat with her longer than it should have. She wasn't sure if they were still talking about the horse. For a moment, there was only the sound of birdsong and the creaking of wood under Jesse's hand. Sadie hesitated, then said, "Would you mind if I stayed a while? Helped out?" Jesse stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "If you know how to swing a hammer, I ain't one to stop you." She worked beside him in silence, their rhythm falling into something strangely natural. Sadie didn't fill the air with unnecessary words, and Jesse didn't feel compelled to break the stillness. There was no need. They communicated through action, passing tools, holding boards, testing nails. It was more conversation than either of them had had with someone in years. After a while, Jesse broke the quiet. "You said you were here for your cousin's wedding." Sadie nodded. "She's marrying a banker. Whole town came out for it. Real proper affair." "You don't sound thrilled." "I'm happy for her," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "But that kind of life ain't for me. I work with horses back in Bitter Creek. Train the ones no one else wants." Jesse glanced at her. "You ride?" "Since I could walk. My mother used to say I had hooves instead of feet." He chuckled, low and unexpected. "That why you picked her?" he asked, nodding toward Willow. Sadie's eyes darkened slightly. "She reminded me of someone." She didn't elaborate, and Jesse didn't ask. He could see the weight behind her words, like baggage carefully packed, but too heavy to carry far. Instead, he handed her a rusted nail and moved to the next post. Later, they sat beneath an old cottonwood tree near the barn, sharing a tin cup of well water. The sun dipped low, casting gold over the land. Willow grazed nearby, her once nervous frame now at ease. "She really changed," Sadie murmured. "She was never the problem," Jesse said quietly. "Just needed time, space, someone patient enough to wait." Sadie looked over at him. "Is that how you see people too?" Jesse didn't answer immediately. His gaze rested on the horse, but his eyes were far away. "Used to think if I just kept my head down, worked hard, folks would come around. But most only see what they want to see. Big man with calloused hands? Must be trouble. Must be angry." "Are you?" Sadie asked softly. Jesse met her eyes. "Not anymore." They sat in silence again, this time heavier, fuller. Sadie felt something stir in her chest, an ache she hadn't realized was still there. He was nothing like she expected. Not rough, not broken, just hidden. And yet, in the few hours she'd spent with him, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. The wind picked up slightly, and Jessie stood. Got another hour of light. You want to help me check the troughs? She rose with him, dusting her jeans. Lead the way. As they walked along the fence line, Sadie found herself asking, You ever been married? He didn't look at her, but she caught the stiffness in his shoulders. Almost. She waited. Long time ago. Girl from town. Thought she loved me, but come the wedding day, she left a note instead. I'm sorry, Sadie whispered. He nodded, jaw tight. She said I scared her. Said I wasn't normal. Sadie looked away, her voice bitter. Normal's overrated. When they reached the far trough, Jessie knelt to inspect the water line. You. She hesitated, then said. Almost, too. He wanted a city life. I chose horses. That a hard choice? No, but it got lonely after. Jessie stood again. The light had turned amber now. The sky streaked in violet and rose. The land looked peaceful, the kind of peaceful that couldn't be bought. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Every year, he said. And every year, the land tells me to stay. And the people. He paused. They'll come around. Or they won't. Either way, I'll still be here. As they headed back to the barn, Willow walked calmly beside them, her ears flicking gently as she listened. Jessie stopped to unhook the gate, and Sadie reached out to stroke the mare's face. She listens to you like she understands everything you're not saying. Jessie looked at Sadie then, his voice quiet but steady. So do you. The words settled deep into her, a warmth blooming in her chest. She opened her mouth to reply, but stopped as a voice called out in the distance. From the road, a group of townspeople passed by on wagons, returning from the day's celebrations. Laughter carried on the wind, but when they saw Jessie, the laughter stopped. A woman whispered something, and another laughed nervously. Jessie's shoulders stiffened again, but he said nothing. He just stepped back, fading slightly behind the barn shadow. Sadie watched the wagons go, watched how quickly joy turned to judgment. She turned back to Jessie. They don't know you. They don't want to. She walked closer, her voice firm. Then they're fools. He looked at her, something like surprise in his eyes. I've only known you a day, she continued. But I know the look in Willow's eyes, and I know what it means when someone gives you peace instead of fear. Jessie didn't reply, but his hands, which had been clenched, slowly relaxed. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Sadie helped him close the gate. Neither spoke, but the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt like hiding. It felt like something waiting to begin. By the time the second weekend rolled around, Cedar Hollow was buzzing with excitement over the final day of the marriage fair. Bunting hung from every awning, bake pies cooled on windowsills, and a local brass band tuned their instruments for the evening celebration. But beneath the festivity was something colder, sharper. Whispers that had shifted from dresses and dances to something far more personal. Sadie walked through the town square with Willow, now calm as a breeze at her side, and felt the stares. She'd felt them all week. At first, it was curiosity, then confusion. Now it had turned to something uglier. Suspicion. Disapproval. Isn't she the one staying out at Boone's place? One woman murmured loudly to another. That poor girl. She must not know what he is, the other replied. Sadie didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened as she guided Willow past the gossiping crowd. Inside the town hall, the mayor, Thomas Bellows, a man with too much pride and not enough kindness, was finishing a speech about tradition and values. He spotted Sadie from the stage and paused, a smirk curling the corner of his mouth. Well, Miss Sadie Langley, how's the beast treating you? He said, voice too loud, too mocking. The room broke into scattered laughter, though a few people looked uncomfortable. Sadie, unfazed, stepped forward, chin high. He's treated me better than anyone here has, she said coolly. That silenced the room. Mayor Bellows' smirk faded slightly, and his voice dropped. Careful, miss. You're not from here. You don't know what you're defending. I know what I've seen, she said, and what I haven't. He leaned in slightly, his tone hardening. That man's been nothing but trouble since he was a boy. Always too big, too strange. Ask around. I have. I asked his horses. A murmur swept through the room. The mayor stepped back, his face turning red. Later that afternoon, Jesse rode into town for supplies. Unaware of the scene Sadie had just stirred, he dismounted quietly, as he always did, trying to stay out of the way. But people moved back instinctively, like he was something that might snap at any moment. A mother pulled her daughter closer. A merchant gave him his change without making eye contact. Sadie saw it all from across the street. She walked over and handed him a brown paper bag of dried oats. "You okay?" she asked. "Been worse," Jesse muttered. She hesitated. "They're scared of you." "They always were." "Then maybe it's time you show them who you really are." Jesse didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the street, the wary glances, the shifting feet. He looked tired, not physically, but the deep, soul-heavy kind of tired that comes from years of being misunderstood. That evening, the town gathered near the corral for the fair's traditional finale, the riding challenge. Local men would take turns trying to ride Grim, a powerful black stallion known for throwing every rider within seconds. No one had lasted more than 5. It was always a spectacle, part entertainment, part unspoken test of manhood. But this time, Mayor Bellows had added a cruel twist. If Jesse Boone thinks he's got the heart folks say he does, he called out, "Let's see him ride Grim tonight." The crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others exchanged unsure glances. It wasn't just a challenge, it was a trap, a public dare, a spectacle meant to humiliate. Jesse stood at the edge of the gathering, unmoving. His face gave nothing away. Sadie stepped beside him. "You don't owe them anything," she said. "You've got nothing to prove." Jesse looked at her, quiet for a long beat. Then he said, "Maybe I don't, but maybe it's not about me anymore." Before she could stop him, he walked to the center of the corral, his steps steady, deliberate. The mayor's grin returned, smug and sharp. "Well now," Bellows said, clapping his hands, "let's give the man his stage." Grim was brought out, snorting and stamping, his eyes wild and untrusting. He reared once, nearly knocking over the handler. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the show. Jesse approached the horse slowly, hands low, posture calm. He didn't rush, didn't posture, just watched. Grim watched back, uncertain. Jesse whispered something, so soft it didn't carry. He reached for the reins, and the stallion didn't move. Then, with one slow breath, Jesse swung up into the saddle. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Grim exploded. The stallion bucked, twisted, lunged into the air, hooves scraping the sky. Jesse held tight, not with brute force, but with balance, with trust. He didn't yank the reins or shout commands. He moved with the horse, not against it. The crowd roared. Some laughed. Others screamed. Sadie didn't move. Her hands were clenched white at her sides, eyes locked on Jesse. Seconds passed. Then 10. Then 20. Grim slowed. He snorted, stamped hard, then stilled. Jesse remained seated, breathing hard but steady. He reached down, stroked the stallion's neck. The crowd was dead silent. Then a single clap broke through. Then another. And then the rest followed. Awkward, uncertain at first, but then rising into a wave of applause. Mayor Bellows looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. Jesse dismounted, patted Grim once more, and turned to leave without a word. Sadie met him at the edge of the corral. She didn't smile, didn't say anything grand or poetic. She just looked at him with eyes full of something rare, recognition, respect, maybe more. "You didn't do that for them," she said quietly. "No," Jesse replied. "I did it for the ones who never get heard." Behind them, the crowd was still murmuring, recalibrating. Perceptions were cracking. Something had shifted. Jesse handed the reins to a stable hand and turned toward his horse. Sadie followed beside him without needing an invitation. The mayor called after them, voice brittle. "Well, maybe the beast has got a brain after all." Jesse didn't turn, but Sadie did. She walked back a step, looked the mayor straight in the eyes, and said, "He's got more heart than you'll ever have." The silence that followed was louder than any applause. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops of Cedar Hollow, Jesse and Sadie walked out of the corral together, two figures side by side, no longer shadowed, no longer alone. And for the first time in a long while, Jesse Boone didn't feel like the giant. He felt like a man finally seen. The days that followed brought an uneasy calm to Cedar Hollow. The town, still adjusting to what it had witnessed during the fair, found itself divided. Some spoke quietly of what they had seen, how the feared giant had ridden the beast no man could tame without force or fury, but with patience and understanding. Others chose to forget, folding their arms and muttering that it must have been luck or trickery. And then there were those who looked Jesse Boone in the eye for the first time in years, no longer with fear, but with curiosity, respect. Jesse noticed the difference in the smallest ways. A nod from the blacksmith, a wave from a child too young to remember the stories. The mailman, once rigid with discomfort, now handed Jesse his letters with a soft morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just cracks forming in the old walls that had boxed him in for so long. Sadie stayed on. Her cousin had long since returned to her new home in the city, but Sadie didn't mention leaving. She spent her mornings helping Jesse tend to the horses, her afternoons training Willow in the round pen, and her evenings walking the land with Jesse, often in quiet, shared contemplation. They didn't speak about the future, not yet, but every day their silence said more. One crisp morning, as a chill crept through the air and leaves rustled gold and amber, Jesse found Sadie standing by the fence that bordered the north ridge. She held a letter in her hands, unfolded, read through once, twice. "Something wrong?" he asked, his voice low. She turned, her expression unreadable. "My old boss offered me my job back. Better pay. More horses. Says it's time to stop playing ranch girl and come home." Jesse didn't respond right away. He reached out, gently taking the letter from her hand, eyes scanning the tight handwriting before handing it back. "What do you think?" he asked. Sadie looked out over the ridge, where Willow was grazing near two young colts Jesse had rescued the month before. "I think I'm tired of people telling me where home is." Jesse's mouth quirked into something just shy of a smile. "Then maybe it's time you decide for yourself." She nodded, slipping the letter into her coat pocket. "I have." They walked together, boots crunching over dry grass, not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt electric, full of unspoken things. At the barn, Jesse opened the side door, revealing a freshly sanded stall with new bedding. "She's yours if you want her," he said simply. Sadie blinked. "Willow, you trained her. She follows you like you hung the moon. You two belong together." She looked at him, really looked, and her voice softened. "And what about you?" He met her gaze. "I don't belong to anyone, but I'd stay near if you asked." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning, yet light in its simplicity. They didn't need declarations. Not yet. What they had wasn't the kind of thing that needed to be rushed. It just needed to be real. And it was. The next week brought storms, thick, drumming rain and wind that howled through the hills like old ghosts. Fences blew down. A tree fell near the barn. Jesse and Sadie worked side by side through the storm, mud up to their knees, laughter rising between gritted efforts. At one point, she slipped, nearly falling face first into a puddle, but Jesse caught her by the waist and held her there, their faces inches apart. She didn't pull away. "You always catch people like that?" she asked, breathless. "No," he replied. "Only you." When the storm passed, the ranch seemed to breathe. The fields greener, the air cleaner, the horses frisky with new energy. Jesse stood on the porch with Sadie, mugs of coffee in hand, the sunrise painting everything in orange and rose. "You ever think about what comes next?" Sadie asked, her tone light, but the question serious. "All the time," he said. "Used to scare me. Now not so much." She leaned her shoulder against his. "And what does next look like to you?" He paused, thoughtful. "Waking up to the sound of Willow kicking her stall. Sharing coffee with someone who doesn't mind my quiet. Teaching kids how to listen to horses instead of yelling at them." "Kids?" she asked, surprised. "Not mine," he said with a chuckle. "Town kids. Ones who don't get much attention. Thought maybe I'd offer lessons. Give them something to do besides cause trouble. Sadie smiled. They'd be lucky to have you. He turned to her. I'd be lucky to have you. There it was. No grand gesture, no sweeping romance. Just truth, offered like a hand extended across a bridge. She took it. By early fall, whispers around town had changed tone. Jesse Boone was still large, still quiet, but now people talked about how he tamed Grim, how he'd saved a runaway mare, how he'd opened his land to teach riding to the local youth. Children ran past the general store calling out his name, asking when the next lesson was. Mothers brought pies to the ranch in thanks. A few brave men asked if he'd show them how to handle their own stubborn horses. And through it all, Sadie stayed. One night, as they sat by the fire pit under a sky full of stars, Jesse reached for her hand. Not urgently, just naturally, like it had always belonged there. You know, he said softly, for a long time, I thought my story was already written. Thought I'd been cast as the monster, and that was that. She squeezed his hand. Monsters don't rescue Maras. They don't ride wild stallions with kindness. And they sure don't build new stalls, just to give a woman a reason to stay. He looked at her, eyes glinting with the firelight. I didn't build it to make you stay. I know, she said. That's why I'm not leaving. And in the stillness that followed, under a sky that had seen years of his loneliness, Jesse Boone felt something shift deep within him. Not just acceptance, not just love, but peace. He was no longer the giant people feared. He was the man her horse trusted, and that made all the difference.